A few years after the Treaty of 1861, many of our tribal members were in a state of destitution. They had no land left, and they were living with often their Prairie Potawatomi kinsmen on their reservation. So in 1867, our tribal leaders met again with federal agents to negotiate the Treaty of 1867, which allowed us to sell what lands we did have left in Kansas and purchase a reservation in Indian Territory. We knew that there was not much of a future for us in Kansas. The railroad that had come through and the settlers that were already pushing on the borders were just going to get worse. And so our ancestors made that choice to move to a place where, again, the federal government promised that we would not have to deal with non-natives. It could be a sanctuary for us, and we could live in a style where there wasn't this pressure to constantly turn our land over to people outside of the tribe. So we made that decision in 1867 because we were in a condition where we were really not able to survive where we were, and it really was one of our last options to try to have a successful life for a lot of our tribal members.
When Potawatomi people relocated to Indian Territory from Kansas, the group that followed them and had a history of doing so were Catholic missionaries. However, it plays a little bit deeper into the bigger story and the relationship between the church and the tribe here in Indian Territory, is that the church was actually invited into the territory itself, onto the reservation, for the establishment of a mission for educational and for vocational practices. But there were a particular set of group of families that were part of this invitation and who worked with the missionaries for the establishment, the physical construction of the mission. One particular family was an Algonquin family. Their patriarch, Stephen Algonquin, was a community leader and one of those individuals that worked closely with missionaries for its establishment and location. But they put blood and sweat equity into the construction of the buildings themselves, were parishioners at that church, and members of that community that was built around the mission. Stephen's children actually attended the school. One of his sons, Albert, really took to theological study. He was a really promising student. There was a lot that was written about him by the monks, to where he eventually took on theological study, went to Rome for specific training and for ordination, became the first Roman Catholic ordained Native American priest. An artifact that we have displayed that links Albert to this particular gallery in this time is a rosary that he had created during his time in mission work in Wisconsin. After he had returned from Rome, he had visited several parishes and missions in Wisconsin, visiting families and communities in that area. And one gift that he gave to a particular family that he stayed with was this rosary.
We really wanted to give our visitors a little bit of a reprieve from the bold red and the really stark yellow that in the previous two sections of the museum that they've just left. We chose the blue because it was helping to represent that even though there was a lot of change that happened in this time period, our ancestors were finally in a place that would be our permanent home, the place where our reservation still is today. So that blue was meant to sort of help convey that there was some permanence here. There was the ability to put down some roots and start to establish a new community here. And that really is a big shift from what was happening in Kansas. We chose to feature some stained glass that is a direct copy from stained glass that is down at Sacred Heart in what used to be the southeast corner of the reservation, because Sacred Heart was, just like in Kansas, the missionary school was a central part of daily life for people on the reservation at that time. Most of our ancestors were educated at Sacred Heart. We offered 1 square mile of our reservation lands to the monks to come down. We helped to physically build this church. The Algonquin family and a few other tribal members put their blood, sweat, and tears into physically building this space. It also allows us to talk about the problems of Sacred Heart and putting kids into missionary schools and trying to assimilate out the the parts of them that were still very Potawatomi and still very native. So being able to highlight the pluses and the minuses of Sacred Heart was something that was really important to us, and that stained glass piece is a fantastic visual that really draws you in, is visually compelling, but then allows you to question, were these changes really good for the community? Were they good for some people and not others? And to just begin to ask those questions of yourself and of the history.
There was a cooperative project between the mission or the church with the tribe to where new housing was being created for the windows themselves for preservation purposes. The tribe actually photographed and documented the windows as they were being removed and reinstalled, so we were able to use those photographs to replicate the window and use it as a pretty significant symbolic piece for that part of the gallery. We wanted to include the printing press because it is a substantial artifact, a big piece of history. We obtained it from St. Gregory's University, or from the monks there, who had reclaimed it and preserved it from the mission itself once it had moved to St. Gregory's. They actually utilized that press up until a couple of years ago, printing flyers and pamphlets and things like that. But they wanted to gift it to us because they knew that we were renovating the galleries and that we wanted to use it as a specific piece, as more of a landmark piece for the gallery itself. The press is important because it was the original printing press for a publication known as the Indian Advocate. It is the second oldest printing press in the territory, outside of the oldest being the printing press that printed the Cherokee Advocate for the Cherokee Nation. It was difficult to set up. It is a heavy, solid piece of steel. There are not really many components that come off of it other than the belt. So it was 6 guys moving it onto the platform and situating it. It was that piece and the stained glass piece were the last things that we installed in the gallery. The chest that's displayed in the gallery was obtained by Richard Johnson, the son of David P. Johnson, who was a Citizen Potawatomi student at Carlisle Industrial School in Pennsylvania. He was sent there as a young child, and the trunk belonged to him. It held all of his personal belongings, from clothing to service wear, to really anything that they utilized. Dick preserved that throughout the years, and he thought that it was necessary for the tribe or the community to have this and have it on display so that people could understand and be educated the way in which ancestors and the troubles that they had to go through in attending these particular schools. The image that we chose as the mural setting for that particular gallery is a classroom setting of the girls' school, St. Mary's at Sacred Heart Mission. It was sort of a stage scene to show the way in which the girls attended class, what the study was, and who the teachers were, particularly the nuns. The commodity bag dress that we have on display is an artifact that was donated by the Navarre family and worn by many generations. I think it symbolizes the strength of individuals during that time period to be able to utilize what resources they had and materials that they had available for them to craft elegant Potawatomi-esque clothing that they could wear to show off and celebrate their heritage. We wanted to include the interactive map to illustrate what the allotment process in that period was. The map itself details every allottee's individual allotment, where they're located on the reservation, but there's also small biographical catalogs that are attached to each allotment that details who that individual was and what their family were doing at that time. Visitors to the gallery really gravitate towards that, and I think staff are just as excited as the visitors to show off that piece too. I think it really connects people, one, to the community, but truly to the land that we're on, and understanding that the land belonged to them and the history that was created from it. The CHC obtained Mary Anderson's wedding dress from the Santa Fe Depot, or the Potawatomi County Historical Society. They had it for a number of years. A family member had actually donated it to them for safekeeping. And once they understood that we had an established or dedicated cultural center, they wanted to gift that back to the community. We're very appreciative of it. We wanted to display Mary's wedding dress from the transition from the Indian Territory portion of the gallery into today to symbolize really her role as a leader in the community, an educator, one who created and preserved bonds within the community and the neighbors of Potawatomi people. And I think in doing that, the wedding dress, as it serves as a bond in marriage and relationships that way, it does the same in understanding who Mary was and her relationship to the community.
This is a period in our history where a lot of people start to question what the assimilation methods of the federal government, what impact they were having on the Potawatomi community. Most people that were on the reservation that were children did attend Sacred Heart. Not all, but many. Many enjoyed it. They enjoyed learning. They enjoyed learning from nuns and priests. Others hated it. They may have enjoyed school, but they did not like learning from nuns and priests. And you had individual responses to this. But what we really want people to understand as they come through is no matter how these people responded to being educated in a Western style and being educated by missionaries, they were no less Potawatomi. They were not giving up their Potawatomi-ness, if you will. They were not saying, I don't want to be Potawatomi anymore and I'm casting this off. This was still part of their identity. This was just the reality of their identity in Indian Territory, in a place where you were going to be pressured to go to school one way or another, where you were going to be challenged to learn how to have a trade that could be useful on a reservation in the West. And so, just like it happened in Kansas, our ancestors were having to live in two worlds. They were having to try to hold on to the things of their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents while also trying to learn certain ways that would allow them to survive in the West, in Indian Territory, and make a living for their future. So it's a time where we ask people who are visiting the museum and tribal members who are coming through to set aside their assumptions and their judgments and remember that their ancestors were just trying to live their lives and they were trying to make the most of a difficult situation, and that even though there were some things that were lost in this time period, they're still Potawatomi. Their ancestors were still, they knew who they were and they were trying to be true to themselves.